Some killers vanish without a trace. No fingerprints, no suspects, no justice. Today, we uncover the chilling stories of 6 serial murderers who walked into the dark and were never caught. These aren't just unsolved cases, they're ghosts in human form, and some may still be out there. 1. The Phantom of Texarkana, the Moonlight Murders. They called him the Phantom Killer, a faceless figure who crept through the shadows of a small town, striking under the veil of night. Between February and May of 1946, the city of Texarkana, straddling the border between Texas and Arkansas, was paralyzed by fear. The killer attacked 8 people, killing 5, in what became one of the most chilling unsolved crime sprees in American history. The first attack came on February 22, 1946. Jimmy Hollis and Mary Jean Larry were parked on a lover's lane when a man in a white mask approached them, wielding a flashlight and a pistol. He ordered them out of the car, then beat Jimmy nearly to death and sexually assaulted Mary Jean. They survived, but barely. A pattern was born. The Phantom hunted couples, often targeting them in isolated areas and striking with terrifying speed and brutality. A second couple was found dead in late March, murdered with a .32 caliber pistol. Then another in April, both brutally slain. The Phantom's final known victims, Virgil and Katie Starks, were attacked in their farmhouse on May 3rd. Virgil was shot through the window while listening to the radio. Katie, despite being shot in the face, survived. What made the Phantom Killer so elusive was not just his brutality, it was the utter lack of evidence. He left no fingerprints, no shell casings, no personal items. Witness descriptions were inconsistent. His mask, a sack with eye holes, added to his ghostly image. He became a legend almost overnight. Psychologically, the Phantom fits the profile of a disorganized killer, someone driven by compulsion rather than planning. His choice of victims suggests deep-seated sexual resentment or a possible incel-like ideology, targeting young couples as a projection of his own social failures. His mask, a crude and dehumanizing tool, may have served both as a disguise and as a symbolic detachment from the horror he inflicted. The attacks seemed to stop as suddenly as they began. The town remained on edge, the streets silent after dark, the once bustling nightlife frozen in fear. Hundreds were questioned. Possibilities ranged from vagrants to returning World War II veterans with psychological trauma. One suspect, Ul Swinney, was arrested and imprisoned for unrelated crimes. His behavior and circumstantial connections made him a top suspect, but the evidence was too weak to prosecute for murder. Decades passed. The Phantom became folklore, an urban legend whispered in midnight tales. But for those who lived through it, and for investigators like myself, it was always real. The fear, the silence, the unanswered questions. Could he have died shortly after the last attack? Or simply moved on, blending into another town, changing his method, maybe even killing again under a different name? The truth is, the Phantom may still be out there, an old man now, faceless and forgotten. But I often wonder if he ever looks back and smiles at how close he was to being caught, yet vanished like smoke in the dark. 2. The Monster of Florence, Italy's Unseen Butcher. Between 1968 and 1985, the rolling hills of Tuscany, a place of vineyards, Renaissance art, and serene countryside, harbored something unthinkable, a predator, a ghost in human form. They called him Il Mostro di Firenze, the Monster of Florence. His victims were young couples, often parked in cars on quiet lovers' lanes outside the city. The attacks followed a consistent and ritualistic pattern. He would shoot the male partner, then mutilate the female, often with horrifying precision. In total, 16 people were murdered in 8 double homicides over nearly 2 decades. The killings began with the 1968 murder of Antonio Lobianco and Barbara Lacci, but at the time, it was thought to be a domestic crime. It wasn't until 1974, with a strikingly similar attack, that police began connecting the dots. Then in 1981, after 2 more murders, Italian investigators publicly acknowledged they were dealing with a serial killer. The monster's method was chilling. He used a .22 caliber Beretta pistol, always with the same rare type of ammunition, Winchester Series H bullets. He often returned to mutilate the bodies post-mortem, specifically targeting female genitalia with surgical precision. Some believe this indicated medical training or a symbolic hatred of women, possibly rooted in deep sexual trauma or obsession. Investigators began to theorize about the psychology of the killer. He was likely local, familiar with the back roads of Tuscany. He may have lived a double life, perhaps a quiet butcher, a medical assistant, or a loner who watched from the shadows. His hatred appeared focused, ritualistic, and possibly fueled by delusion or religious repression. Dozens of suspects were interrogated. One of the most notable was Pietro Pacciani, a farmer with a violent past and clear misogynistic tendencies. He was convicted in 1994, but later acquitted on appeal due to lack of evidence. His alleged accomplices, known as the snack companions, were also investigated, but nothing stuck. The case became a national obsession. Books were written. Journalists who probed too deeply faced intimidation. Even the famous American thriller author Thomas Harris, of The Silence of the Lambs, drew inspiration from the case for Hannibal. Despite thousands of pages of reports, tip lines, and psych profiles, the monster of Florence was never definitively identified. The last known killing occurred in 1985, after which he vanished, just like that. What haunts me most is the possibility that he never stopped. Perhaps he simply changed location, changed tactics, or changed identities. Or maybe he did stop because he no longer needed to kill. Whatever his motive was, hatred, compulsion, sexual gratification, it may have eventually burned out or evolved into something else. To this day, he remains one of the most intelligent, elusive, and surgically sadistic serial killers in European history, and his shadow still lingers across the peaceful Tuscan hills. 3. The Servant Girl Annihilator, America's first forgotten predator. Long before the term serial killer even existed, a silent terror swept through Austin, Texas in the mid-1880s. It was a time of oil lamps, dirt roads, and horse-drawn carriages. Yet hidden beneath the surface of this booming post-Reconstruction town was a monster the press would eventually call the Servant Girl Annihilator. The killer struck between December 1884 and December 1885, targeting mostly African-American servant women, dragging them from their homes in the dead of night, and murdering them in brutal, ritualistic fashion. Some were stabbed, others were bludgeoned. Several were sexually assaulted with sharp objects. A few victims had their brains bashed in with axes taken from their own homes. The killer's spree ended with 8 confirmed murders, including 2 white women on Christmas Eve, murders that drew national attention and a citywide panic. But despite the public outcry, he was never caught, and few today even know his name. Why? Because America hadn't yet developed the vocabulary or the investigative tools to recognize serial homicide. This was 1885, 15 years before the Jack the Ripper killings, and long before profiling or forensic science. The killings had signature traits. The victims were all attacked in their homes, often in small servant quarters behind the main houses. Lanterns were left outside the door, partially turned down. Windows were pried open. Victims were dragged outside and slaughtered in yards or alleys. In one case, the killer left behind a bloody axe, his preferred weapon. He didn't just kill, he desecrated. The psychological profile that emerges is complex. He may have been a sexual sadist with deep-seated rage toward women, particularly women of lower social status. The fact that he escalated to white victims toward the end suggests either increased confidence or a desire for recognition. The brutality of the crimes, organs removed, bodies arranged, suggests a deep psychosexual compulsion, not just random violence. Police arrested more than 400 men, including husbands, drifters, and former soldiers, but no one was ever convicted. Some suspected a local madman, others whispered about a trained killer who might have worked as a butcher or even a physician. Still others believed the killer had ties to law enforcement, able to move unseen and undetected. One theory, controversial but compelling, suggests that the servant girl annihilator may have later become Jack the Ripper. The timeline fits. The Austin murders ended in 1885. The Ripper's spree began in London in 1888. Both targeted women, involved mutilation, and exhibited symbolic violence. There's no hard proof, but for seasoned investigators, the similarities are unsettling. The Austin killings stopped as suddenly as they began. No one was ever charged. No confession ever surfaced. Like a phantom from a fever dream, the annihilator simply disappeared, leaving behind blood-soaked streets, destroyed families, and a legacy of fear. To this day, I believe he didn't die. He evolved, changed cities, changed his prey, and perhaps he made history all over again under another name. The West Mesa Bone Collector, a desert graveyard of secrets. It began with a storm. In February 2009, after heavy rains swept through the outskirts of Albuquerque, New Mexico, a woman walking her dog on the barren West Mesa noticed something protruding from the dry earth, a human bone. What followed would uncover one of the largest unsolved serial murder cases in American history. 11 women, most of them sex workers or drug users, who had disappeared between 2001 and 2005, were eventually found buried in shallow graves scattered across a patch of desert. A single fetus was also discovered, likely belonging to one of the pregnant victims. The media dubbed the faceless predator the West Mesa Bone Collector. But there were no crime scene clues, no blood, no personal effects, no fingerprints, just silence and bones. The victims shared a tragic commonality. Many lived on the margins of society, women of color, often estranged from family, struggling with addiction. For years, no one noticed their disappearances, and the killer knew this. He exploited it. Who was the bone collector? The FBI believes the killer personally knew or solicited these women, lured them with promises of drugs or money, then murdered them, method unknown, and systematically disposed of their bodies. The burial site was organized, spaced, almost clinical. To bury 11 bodies in a methodical pattern over several years, the killer had to know the terrain intimately. He may have had construction or landscaping experience, possibly someone who worked night shifts or had access to heavy machinery. Some theorized he may have used lye or other chemicals to accelerate decomposition. But even today, no murder weapons, clothing, or forensic material have been recovered. The psychological profile points to a disciplined, methodical killer, perhaps even functioning in society. Unlike impulsive predators, this one exercised patience, control. He was likely antisocial, calculating, and had possibly killed before or after. Multiple suspects have come and gone. One was Lorenzo Montoya, a local man with a history of violence toward sex workers. In 2006, he was shot and killed by the boyfriend of a woman he had strangled. After his death, the disappearances in Albuquerque stopped. Still, no evidence definitively tied him to the Mesa. Then there was Fred Reynolds, a photographer who often took pictures of sex workers. He died of natural causes before police could question him thoroughly. Again, circumstantial links, nothing more. Even now, the site of the graves, a patch of desert near a housing development, sits eerily quiet. Families of the victims still light candles there, but the case remains ice cold. There's one haunting thought I can't shake. If the killer buried 11 women there, how many more were buried elsewhere? What if this was just one dump site, one chapter in a longer hidden saga? The West Mesa Bone Collector didn't vanish. He adapted. He learned from mistakes. And if he's still alive, he may still be hunting. Smarter, quieter, more invisible than ever. 5. Bible John, the Dancing Killer of Glasgow. Between 1968 and 1969, the city of Glasgow, Scotland, was haunted by a soft-spoken, well-dressed man with a peculiar habit, quoting scripture. He was charming, articulate, even polite, until he wasn't. The press called him Bible John. He's officially tied to 3 murders, but likely responsible for more. Each victim was a woman in her mid to late 20s, all of whom had spent the evening at the Barrowland Ballroom, a popular dance hall in Glasgow's East End. Each was found raped and strangled, one beaten savagely, another bitten, all murdered within hours of leaving the ballroom. The killings followed a disturbing pattern. The first known victim, Patricia Docker, was found in a lane near her home in February 1968. She had told her family she was attending a dance at a local hospital, which delayed investigators' ability to trace her final hours. Then, in August 1969, Jemima MacDonald was killed. A week later, in October, came the most brutal murder, Helen Puttock. Helen's case offered the only surviving witness, her sister Jean. The two had met 2 men that night, both named John. One left early, the other took a cab with the sisters. During the ride, Jean noticed something strange. This man in his late 20s or early 30s, clean-cut, with reddish hair, wearing a suit, began quoting passages from the Bible, railing against dancing, drinking, and premarital sex. When he exited the cab, Helen stayed behind. She was found dead the next morning. The killer earned his moniker not from the police but the press. Bible John was never caught, but his presence left a deep scar on the community. Women were terrified. Men were scrutinized. The Barrowland became a place of whispered warnings. From a psychological perspective, Bible John was not a typical spree killer. He demonstrated self-control, ritualism, and ideology. His rage appeared to be morally charged, perhaps driven by religious fanaticism or deep psychological conflict over sexuality. He murdered with a sense of divine justification, possibly seeing himself as punishing sinful women. Despite one of the largest manhunts in Scottish history, Bible John vanished. For decades, the case sat in archives until the rise of DNA forensics reopened possibilities. Attention shifted to Peter Tobin, a convicted serial killer who had frequented the same dance hall in the 1960s, was active during the same period, and bore a striking resemblance to sketches of Bible John. Tobin's crimes, brutal, sexual, and deeply manipulative, made him a strong candidate. But while authorities explored the connection, Tobin never confessed, and no forensic link has ever been confirmed. Tobin died in prison in 2022, still refusing to talk. So Bible John may have taken his secret to the grave, or worse, may have never been Tobin at all. Perhaps he changed cities, abandoned his ritual, or learned to blend in without the fire of Scripture on his tongue. But for those of us who look into the eyes of killers for a living, one thing is clear. Bible John didn't kill from compulsion alone. He killed from belief. And belief can be far more dangerous than impulse. 6. The Long Island serial killer, a killer among the sand dunes. It began with a search for one missing woman, but it ended in the unearthing of a terrifying secret buried along the windswept edges of Gilgo Beach, Long Island. What investigators found there in December 2010 was not just one body, but 4, all wrapped in burlap, all female sex workers, all positioned eerily similar. And it didn't stop there. Over the next several months, police uncovered at least 10 sets of remains, possibly more, scattered across the Ocean Parkway corridor, stretching from Gilgo Beach to Jones Beach. Some bodies were whole, others were dismembered. Some matched women who had gone missing as far back as 1996. The media dubbed him the Long Island serial killer, LISK, though some believe it may have been multiple killers operating in the same area. What is certain is that the killer, or killers, had an intimate understanding of the geography, knew how to dispose of bodies without detection, and specifically targeted vulnerable women, mostly escorts who advertised online. The psychological profile points to an organized, methodical predator, likely someone with strong local knowledge, possibly even law enforcement, or someone with military experience. The use of burlap, the careful spacing of the graves, and the selection of victims who would not draw immediate attention all point to preparation, patience, and cold calculation. But this killer wasn't invisible. He was active, calling the families of victims from their phones to taunt them. In one case, he allegedly called a victim's sister from Madison Square Garden, describing the woman's final moments in chilling detail before hanging up. Police traced the calls, but the killer used burner phones and stayed just long enough in high-traffic areas to avoid detection. One name emerged in public speculation: Dr. Peter Hackett, a former emergency services official who lived near the beach. He had allegedly contacted one victim's family days after her disappearance, but again, there was no solid evidence. Another suspect, James Burke, a disgraced police chief, was later arrested for unrelated crimes. Rumors swirled, but nothing stuck. In 2023, authorities arrested Rex Heuermann, an architect living in Massapequa Park, in connection with 4 of the Gilgo Beach victims. His arrest marked a major breakthrough, but even then, investigators admitted that many other remains may be unrelated to Heuermann, suggesting multiple killers operated along the same coastline. So is the Long Island serial killer truly caught? Not fully, not yet. The final count of Lisk's victims may never be known. The dunes have given up secrets, but not all. Some bones are still unidentified. Some women are still missing, and the vast stretches of marshland, sea fog, and shifting sands continue to guard their silence. Forensic science is catching up, but I fear this killer, if still alive, knows it. He may have stopped, or he may have simply moved on. Another city, another hunting ground, another series of women who will vanish in the dark. And like so many before him, he may be hiding right in plain sight.